Now I would like to start Time to Act for Hydrogen workshop. We would like to consider why hydrogen is important and what it means that it's time to act for hydrogen. My name is Ohira, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this forum. In order to limit the increase of global average temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, it is necessary to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to net zero by 2050. All countries, cities, and companies have the target to reduce the emissions to net zero by 2050. And in order to promote the actions, it's time to act. We need to act now. And as one of the actions, the world is accelerating the use of hydrogen, which is essential for decarbonization. Hydrogen has many outstanding features, such as improved energy security and reduced environment impact. And it's also promising for regulating force for electricity derived from renewable energy sources. Against this background, we would like to focus on the use of hydrogen in the transport sector. In the cities, there are many people, and hydrogen transport is a very important component for people's lives and business activities. And in Tokyo, it accounts for the 20% of the emissions. The fuel baths and the use of hydrogen is already introduced. And the transport sector is expected to contribute to the use of hydrogen. So today we have 4 panelists. Based on their experience, we would like to discuss which direction we should go in terms of ACT. Now, we would like to ask each panelist to introduce their activities. First, the first speaker is Mr. Kamiyama, Director, Next Generation Energy Promotion Division, Bureau of Environment of Tokyo Metropolitan Government. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm promoting hydrogen. My name is Hajime Kamiyama. It's nice to meet you. And thank you very much for joining this discussion today. Tokyo has a population of 14 million, and there are many office buildings. So as something we can do is to use hydrogen for mobility, and we started this early. We need to take in the demand for fuel as much as possible for the use of hydrogen. Today, I would like to talk about what Tokyo does for hydrogen mobility. But before that, we would like to talk about our measures against climate change, and I would like to talk about the use of hydrogen for hydrogen mobility. Tokyo Metropolitan Government, just like other cities around the world, aim to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to net zero by 2050. And that's called Zero Emission Tokyo, and we have been accelerating our measures. So time to act is our slogan, and our sense of crisis needs to be transformed into actions. Especially by 2030, we need to accelerate our actions, and that's very important. We would like to reduce the emissions by half by 2030. So decarbonization of mobility is one of the key actions we take. In the Zero Emission Tokyo strategy, in order to achieve net zero by 2050, renewable hydrogen is one of the pillars. In order to achieve that by 2030, for instance, we will use more than 300 zero-emission buses, and the new car sales of passenger cars, the 50% of such new cars should be zero-emission vehicles. And we will install more than 150 hydrogen refueling stations. As a specific actions to realize this, we are promoting the installation of hydrogen stations. Infrastructure is very important for introducing hydrogen mobility. In Tokyo, we subsidize 80% of the cost for installation of hydrogen station for large companies together with national government. And for the small and medium-sized businesses, 100% subsidy is provided. And this is a very generous subsidies. As you can see here, FCV is being introduced, and mainly around the Bay areas, there are more hydrogen stations, but in the inland areas, we have less stations, and that is our challenge. Let me talk about hydrogen mobility. As for FCVs, we started to subsidize the purchase of FCVs from 2015, and we have more than 500 FCVs in Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games. And in Tokyo, there are 1,500 FCVs. So we use the Olympic Games as an opportunity to advertise FCVs. And also, we want many people to experience FCVs. So we are promoting the use of FCVs for car sharing. Next, about FC buses. FC buses are larger than passenger cars, and they run every day. So it can create the demand 45 times larger than that of passenger cars. And we would like to reduce the cost for purchasing FC buses. So we are subsidizing the purchase of FC buses. Currently, we have 85 FC route buses in Tokyo, including 70 owned by Toei buses. In order to increase the demand for hydrogen mobility, we would try to switch the cars like FC garbage trucks and FC forklifts. And we would like to introduce the FC trucks and large commercial vehicles which uses fuel cells. So we would like to demand both the increase of the demand and also the introduction of such FCVs. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamiyama. Next, I would like to ask Ms. Lee Ji-yeon, who is a Climate and Environment from Climate, Environment and Headquarters and from Seoul Metropolitan Government.
Lee さん、ミュートになってます。
Would you unmute, please?
I'm sorry. Hello. Let me first thank Tokyo for inviting me to this important event. Today, I would like to share with you how we in Seoul are shifting to hydrogen mobility. The 19% of greenhouse gas emission and the 37% of PM2.5 that come from transport in Seoul. Therefore, it is urgent that we decarbonize the transport sector to address both climate change and air pollution. As of December 2020, about 30,000 and 1,600 vehicles out of the about 3 billion registered vehicles in Seoul, battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles respectively. Their uptake is still low. As you are all familiar, a growing number of countries and manufacturers have announced a plan to phase out the internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030 to 2040. We also announced our own plan to ban registration of ICE EVs from 2035. When launched Seoul 2050 Climate Action Plan, we are taking various policy measures to turn into a reality. In order to build a legal foundation, we enacted an ordinance in January this year. We are currently developing the specific strategies to promote hydrogen mobility and hydrogen energy supply, and we put them into a basic plan for the promotion of hydrogen industry by the end of this year. So we have many policy measures in place to promote hydrogen mobility. But since we don't have enough time today, let me mainly talk about our subsidy program for the FCE with the passenger vehicles and the expansion of the charging infrastructure, the later on. Seoul provides subsidies for FCE with the purchase to accelerate the transition to green mobility. As for charging infrastructure, the public sector needs to induce the private investment in the long term. The Seoul also led out such a plan in Seoul Vision 2030, launched in September this year. The Seoul vision for environment is a smart eco-city. We aim to cut GHG emission by 40% by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050. As for PM 2.5, we aim to reduce the levels to the 30 micrograms per cubic meter by 2025. More specifically, we are going to ensure that one for every vehicle on the road will be FCE with, and we will fully safety the public commercial vehicle like buses, freight vehicles, and the cleaning cars into GVs. We are also improving access to charging infrastructure within a 10 minutes walk from where people live. Among others, the Seoul provided subsidies for purchase of VEVs and FCEVs for the passenger cars. Any individual living in Seoul and or the business in the operation in the city are eligible for the subsidy program. The subsidies funded both by the city and the national government are worth about $28,000 for each recipient. The other incentives, such as the tax benefits and the parking fee exemption, are also in place. The subsidies have led to 2,000 GVs on the road by the first half of this year. From next year, we are going to introduce the pilot FCEVs for cleaning vehicles and to keep expanding them to larger public fleet like buses. Currently, 4 charging stations are in the operation in Seoul. 2 new charging stations are under construction, and the existing charging station is being expanded. You should make a reservation to charge your car on application. Moreover, we prioritize safety. We undergo thorough safety procedures for the charging station as well. In the longer term, we are expanding charging infrastructure to respond to growing demand for FCEVs and further promote them. The cooperation with the stakeholders is the key for this. So we are working with the state government to make it easier for the private sector to set up the charging infrastructure. We, in fact, signed an MOU with the Hyundai Motors the March last year to work together to promote the FCEVs. We will keep partnering with the businesses to promote the entire hydrogen industry. Before I conclude, let me take this opportunity to invite you all to the Seoul International Forum on Air Quality Improvement. to be held virtually from October 28 to 29. You will be able to learn best practices and the latest trends from global cities and the experts. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee Jo-young. Next, I would like to call on Mr. Andrew Broadbent from the state of Queensland.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity. I'd like to speak in the brief time I have available about the Queensland hydrogen industry strategy and the activities that the Queensland government is undertaking in relation to development of the hydrogen industry. I've been working on hydrogen industry development since early 2018 when the Premier Palaszczuk, Queensland's Premier, visited Korea and Japan and saw the ambitions and the enthusiasm for hydrogen development and came back very excited about the opportunity. So the Queensland government has been very active since that time in relation to the development of the renewable hydrogen industry. It's consistent across both the Queensland government and the Australian government that they have ambitions for decarbonisation or emission reductions. The Australian government has a technology roadmap approach and released a national hydrogen strategy in 2019, which complements the Queensland hydrogen industry strategy, which was released earlier in 2019. The enthusiasm for hydrogen is shared by the private sector, and a recent survey, as you'll see there, of the Queensland resources sector demonstrated that there's a very high level of interest in the development of hydrogen and the opportunities that it presents. The Queensland strategy was released in May 2019. Unlike a number of strategies globally, it doesn't set any specific targets for use or price, for example, but it does set an ambitious vision in relation to the domestic use and also the opportunity to partner with our international partners in relation to large-scale export projects. It covers, 5 focus areas. I won't talk about all of them today, obviously, in the time available, but certainly facilitating private sector investment and getting the settings right to enable the industry to develop are key elements of the strategy, as well as building community awareness and confidence. Since the release of the strategy, we've had very significant levels of private sector investment interest and activity. It's fair to say that seeing some of the numbers that are have been shown by the previous presenters, that we're still a long way behind in terms of the adoption of hydrogen. We were pretty excited recently to have our first hydrogen refueler and our first 5 cars going into the government fleet. It's obviously a long way behind where our international partners are. We are seeing very significant investment activity and interest, particularly in the mobility space, as has been referred to by previous speakers, particularly in the heavy vehicle space because of the very large distances that have to be travelled in Queensland and the particular economic opportunity around back-to-base refuelers. We obviously have very significant interest in passenger buses. The other one that's probably relatively unique to Australia is remote area power. And we also do have a lot of interest from our local governments who operate wastewater treatment plants about the opportunity to integrate hydrogen production into wastewater treatment plants. So that would give you a feel on this page in terms of the diversity of investment interests that we do have from the tip of Cape York to the border of New South Wales. And we also have emerging manufacturing opportunities. You would have seen the recent announcement probably by Fortescue Future Industries in relation to electrolyser manufacturing at Gladstone. International is a key element of the work. This is a translation led by Professor Sugiyama of the University of Tokyo, who was appointed as an honorary hydrogen envoy for Queensland. And this photo is of a delegation out at the Queensland H2 export renewable energy pilot plant. I think I'm out of time. So I'd just like to talk briefly about some of the international collaboration that's occurring. It's very similar to what we've seen historically in the resources sector. This is an example of some of those international export partnerships that are starting to emerge. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Munakata from the Hydrogen Value Team of Iwatani Corporation. I'm Munakata from Iwatani Corporation. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Iwatani, I'm going to talk about our initiatives for hydrogen strategy and the building global supply chain. And this is the overview of our company. We sell natural gas and LPG gas, and that accounts for about 50%. And the hydrogen division, that belongs to industrial gases and machinery, and that has about 30% of total sales. So our relationship with hydrogen is very long, and we started handling hydrogens 1941. The founder dreamed of flying airplane using hydrogen, so we have been focusing on hydrogen ever since. We started to manufacture liquefied hydrogen for the rockets, but supposing that the hydrogen society would come, we started to construct and operate large-scale liquefied hydrogen plant, and today we have 70% market share in hydrogen, and in case of liquefied hydrogen, we have 100% share. So for building a future hydrogen supply chain, we are thinking about something like shown in the diagram. So in the past, we used to use fossil fuel to produce hydrogen, and so we emitted carbon dioxide. However, Japan now aims to reduce the carbon dioxide to net zero, and considering the energy security as well, we need to produce green and blue hydrogen in Japan. So in order to build a large-scale supply chain using the overseas resources, we were chosen as the project for Green Innovation Fund. So together with Japan Suiso Energy and ENEOS, we are trying to build the supply chain. And also, we have received great support from Queensland government. And Powerwell, the company, has also supported us. So we've been working with them very closely. We would like to accelerate green and blue hydrogen production using various resources. And this is what we do in Japan. Thanks to the support of NEDO, we are producing hydrogen by the company called Hystra, and a similar project. We are thinking about doing similar project in Hokkaido as well. And FH2R in Fukushima Prefecture is also used as a production of hydrogen for renewable sources. And we are also trying to produce hydrogen from waste plastic. Next, I would like to talk about a hydrogen refueling station in Japan. In 2020, out of 160, we operate 53 of them. And we sell equipment and to other companies. So in total, we are connected to 80 fueling stations. So our share is 50%. So we would like to increase that number by 30 by 2023. And also we would like to focus more on mid-heavy duty vehicles. Tokyo Metropolitan government has supported us for looking for a site and also supporting us financially. So in Ake or Kasai, we have about 20 to 30 vehicles come for refueling. And this is in 2019, we purchased 4 stations in the United States and California. And Toyota Motors supported us, and we opened 7 more refueling stations near Los Angeles. We are going to build 7 more refueling stations near Los Angeles. And thanks to the support from the state of California, we further increased the number of refueling stations by 12. And for Osaka Kansai Expo, we are thinking about operating fuel cell ship. So we will think about doing the refueling and bunkering and all that as a part of this project. We would like to create the hydrogen market and demand and build large-scale supply chain of low-price carbon dioxide-free hydrogen. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. So to expand this hydrogen mobility, we need the infrastructure for hydrogen. And you talked about your efforts to realize all that. And now we would like to start a discussion. In order to expand hydrogen mobility, we need to expand the demand for hydrogen as well. And also, we need to develop hydrogen related to hydrogen. So we need to build an ecosystem around hydrogen. And also, in order to create that demand for hydrogen, the Tokyo Metropolitan government is offering subsidies so that the FCVs and FC buses are introduced. So through such initiatives and programs, maybe you have found some issues and challenges. And what kind of actions you think you would like to take to overcome such issues? Mr. Kamiyama, thank you very much. There aren't enough hydrogen stations in Tokyo. And because of that, FC passenger cars is not increasing as much as we expected. FC buses are increasing, on the other hand. But because of the COVID crisis, the passengers dropped significantly. So the financial state of such bus companies are very bad. So hydrogen price is double the price of diesel oil. So that is also a financial burden for hydrogen users. So that would be a barrier for introducing FC buses. And because of that, beginning this fiscal year, Tokyo Metropolitan government will subsidize half the difference of the fuel cost of hydrogen and diesel oil. in order to enhance the function of the hydrogen station and make the hydrogen stations economically independent, we are thinking about making it a station that can supply not just hydrogen, but also charge electricity. And in order to increase the demand for hydrogen, we should increase the FCVs and electric vehicles to expand the use of zero-emission vehicles. So we are thinking about building a station that can supply multiple fuels.
東京都の動きと
So we've been talking about promoting demand. Now we've talked about Tokyo, and we know that Queensland are also focusing on the supply of green hydrogen for various things. So it may take a little while for this to become a real commercial available business. But what are the actions that you are taking? Munakata-san, maybe could you talk about that? So as Mr. Kamayama said, Tokyo is really active working on the situation. But there are big differences between cities. So when we look at across Japan, it's not just Tokyo. And for other cities, we would hope that they would set solid targets, concrete targets, so that we private businesses can invest with confidence. If governments could set targets, that would really help. And because the California state regulation, I'm not sure if we can get to the same level. But governments should be setting some kind of target to work towards. Okay, thank you. So as hydrogen demand grows, how do we supply hydrogen becomes a key point. So state of Queensland has been working on those initiatives in order to develop the industry. And you have been putting together a lot of strategies for that, as mentioned in the presentation. So I'm sure many things are underway. And are there any challenges that you felt in your endeavors? And what are the next steps that you will be taking? Mr. Andrew Broadbent, would you like to answer the question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. So I guess for us, we're a long way behind where both Korea and Japan is in terms of the deployment of hydrogen for transport. We have, as I said in my presentation, we have our first 5 fuel cell electric vehicles operating in the government fleet. The government has obviously had to work to underwrite that project to, in effect, increase the confidence of fleet operators and the community with the safety and reliability of hydrogen vehicles. We have focused a couple of funding rounds through our Hydrogen Industry Development Fund. There's mobility projects that are coming through that. So in the bus space, we've got emerging activity in ferries, for example, as well. We'll probably see a phase of development where bus operators are wanting to run perhaps 1 or 2 buses in their fleets to get confidence in terms of the costs, the reliability, the capacity to service, and issues like that. We're certainly very focused on getting the cost of production down, because we think that obviously cost of production of hydrogen and the capacity to produce it cost competitively with conventional fuels will activate a whole range of potential end users. I spoke briefly in my presentation in relation to the production of renewable hydrogen associated with wastewater treatment plants. Queensland's obviously a very distributed state, lots of distances between towns and cities. The opportunity for individual towns and cities to become their own hydrogen production centres and to be able to ensure fuel security for those regional towns and cities is obviously a very significant domestic opportunity in Queensland.
Thank you very much for that. So instead of a conventional supply chain, cities could actually become hubs for supplying hydrogen. And so I'd like to go on to the next topic. As Mr. Nakata said, it is important for us to really have a vision to work towards. And cities need to lead the way in order to create the vision. And so cities have to work with the business world, private sector. From that perspective, I'd like to call on Ms. Lee Jo-young from Seoul Metropolitan Government. You mentioned how, similar to Tokyo, you are actively providing subsidies and incentives, and you are working together with corporations for these initiatives. So in order to further expand this, or in order to formulate a vision, how are you working together with companies? What actions are you taking with companies?
You said subsidies and the incentives are key policy measures to promote FCV for private vehicles at the moment. However, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, heightened public interest in climate crisis, and we believe that this will lead to stronger action from citizens in green mobility. To be well prepared for this, we are expanding charging infrastructure and improving services. And we are also in talk with the national government to its the regulation to make it easier for the private sector to establish a charging infrastructure. Besides, we are planning to work with the local businesses in hydrogen energy sectors to advance our hydrogen policies. So.
Thank you very much for that. So next, I would like to hear from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government on that. You mentioned that you have 85 fuel cell buses implemented. And in order to drive this forward, I'm sure that working together with the private sector is really important. I know that you are still in the initial stages. You have already done some things. But what is Tokyo doing in terms of working together with companies? What is important? Could you also share your past activities and tell us what you think is important to work with corporations? Yes. Well, hydrogen is a new technology. Many industries, many businesses are involved. And so working together with corporations is key. And this is where I would like to talk about our initiative, where we're working on a collaboration with over 100 hydrogen-related businesses. We call it the Tokyo Hydrogen Promotion Team. And we are sharing best practices and promoting hydrogen in an effective manner. Also, in December of last year, Governor Koike has talked to Iwatani, who is here today, and also Toyota and leading Japanese companies in order to discuss concrete actions that could be taken in future. So Governor Koike has talked to these leading companies in the hydrogen businesses, and especially FC trucks and commercial vehicles. Implementing them into the market as soon as possible is key. And so we are working with auto manufacturers almost on a weekly basis on discussing how we can do that. So when the top person shows a vision, then and the government works together with private corporations in order to really draw out their strength, I think that will be an ideal way to do this. Well, thank you for that. So in order to promote this, really, cities need to actively work with companies and have good dialogue. I believe that was your point. And so I'd also like to hear from the company perspective on these collaborations. So Iwatani has hydrogen stations in Japan and outside of Japan. And so I'm sure that Iwatani has been working a lot with local and national governments overseas. And so in collaborating and working with cities, what is important for you from a company perspective? Mr. Munakata, could you also share?
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So as for the business in California, we follow the roadmap set by the state of California, and automobile companies cooperated in order to increase the zero-emission vehicles. So we are very comfortably work with them. And we have to think about how we can produce hydrogen using the refueling stations as well. So we can reduce 30% carbon dioxide, or we can reduce 100%. So we need to make the discussions from now on. So in order for the hydrogen to show its environmental performance, its low carbon feature is very important. So we have to reduce the carbon dioxide in producing hydrogen and produce clean hydrogen. So in order to reduce the decarbonization of hydrogen production, what would be the outlook? There are many electricity from renewable energy. And there's a lot of expectation about this method, but in city areas, the space for setting up the facilities for making renewable energy is limited. So how can we increase the renewable hydrogen? What are the challenges for doing so? So this might be a very difficult challenge, but I would like to ask Mr. Kamiyama to talk about it first. At this moment, we have to expand the use of hydrogen, and hydrogen has to be a stable fuel. And also, we have to reduce the cost of hydrogen. That is also important. So in Japan, the percentage of renewable energy is very low. So we have to start with gray hydrogen. But as we increase the percentage of renewable energy, maybe we can produce more clean hydrogen. In order to achieve that, what can we do now? Well, I would like to introduce some of the things we can do. So first thing is to let people know what renewable hydrogen is, and we have to accumulate our experience in it. So for instance, the introduction of the FC buses to the Metropolitan Toei bus. And also we use the bus for the Olympic Games to advertise FC buses. And there is a subsidy for facilities which produce hydrogen on the premise. So, and I think the import of hydrogen will become feasible in the future. So we can import blue or green hydrogen from other countries, including Australia. And we have to think about that kind of possibility as well. So Iwatani Corporation and many other companies are joining us in discussing all these possible efforts. And we will continue to exchange information. We will continue to work for the target of 2030 and think about how we can use more hydrogen in Tokyo and what kind of support is necessary to realize that. Thank you very much. And the same question, in the cities, how can we expand the use of green hydrogen? I would like to ask the Ms. Lee Ja-woon about how you can expand the use of green hydrogen in the city, in the urban area, because it's very difficult to produce electricity from renewable energy in cities, in the urban area. Park Gil-jun desu.
Sorry. So could you tell me your question one more time?
はい、わかりました。
In the future, we have to use low carbon hydrogen. And one of the ways is to use green hydrogen, which is produced by renewable energy. But in the urban area, it's very difficult to generate renewable energy because the space is limited. So how do you plan to expand the use of green hydrogen or clean hydrogen?
Area, and as we mentioned earlier, we are in discussion with the government to ease the regulations to use our Seoul area. So yes.
그 임포트에 대한 부분 국가적으로 수입하는 데.
Yeah, we are working on a strategies to import this energy from other countries.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. We have to make the best of characteristic of hydrogen. Hydrogen can be transported for a long distance, so we can generate hydrogen in a different country using the renewable energy and transport it to other country. So there will be an international supply chain for green hydrogen in the future. So we need to build such supply chain. So I would like to ask for a comment from two people. First, Mr. Munakata of Iwatani Corporation. And how do you think about the outlook for building a supply chain for green hydrogen? Just as I said earlier, the countries like Australia is promoting the use of green and blue hydrogen, and I think it's very important to build a supply chain for such blue and green hydrogen. From the perspective of energy security, the offshore wind farm is very much limited capacity, so we have to think about producing green hydrogen from maybe we can produce such energy from Akita or Fukushima, and we are now dependent on purchasing hydrogen, but maybe we should try to produce hydrogen as well. Thank you very much. The same question. in order to build a supply chain for green hydrogen, what kind of outlook do you have, Mr. Andrew Broadbent? 質問ありがとうございます。素晴らしい質問だと思います。
So we're obviously working very closely with our international partners to progress what are very significant and very complex projects to put together when we're dealing with a whole range of variables, and we're probably at the cutting edge of technology. For example, the types of scale of production, the types of carriers that are available to transport hydrogen. So we're certainly working very closely with a whole suite of international partners, very similar to what has happened historically in Queensland in the development of the resources sector, both mining and LNG. We're seeing very similar collaborations start to emerge, especially in this instance between our government-owned corporations such as Stanwell, who have a partnership with Iwatani and others, and CS Energy, one of our other government-owned corporations, for example, with IHI. So the thing that probably Professor Sugiyama reinforced to me in our very first and earlier conversations was that we have a couple of things in Queensland that are very advantageous, and that is a lot of land area and very good solar and wind capacity. So we're well placed to be able to produce large amounts of renewable energy, and we also obviously have port infrastructure, etc., to be able to support the export of hydrogen to our trading partners. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And through this discussion, we have gained various insights. And in introducing mobility in cities, in order to do that, global cooperation is very important. And this is an initiative that will take a long time. So we should go step by step, starting with small steps, scaling up. And it's very important to continue the effort. And as Mr. Broadbent said, past experience can lead to future steps, and so experience can play a big role in the future activities. So starting small, starting now, getting experience, and making that lead to the next step is very important. And sharing that experience with others will help to expand this initiative widely. Many stakeholders can bring together their experiences in order to work on discussions that can be beneficial for the future. I believe this is a really important action. And so I really do hope that today's discussion will fuel future discussions. And with that, I would like to end the session thanking all of the members of the audience and all of the panelists. Next time, I really hope that we will be able to meet physically instead of online to have an even more in-depth discussion. So thank you very much for today's discussion.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you.
Thank you very much.